It's midnight, you're lying in bed, and out of nowhere, your brain pulls up a conversation from 3 years ago. Not a big one, not a fight, just something small you said that maybe landed wrong, replaying on a loop you never asked for. If this happens to you, you're not broken and you're not overthinking for no reason. There's an actual mechanism behind it, and once you understand it, the loop starts to lose its grip. Let's name what this is first, because the label matters. This is rumination. The mind's tendency to repetitively revisit a thought or memory without resolving it. But calling it overthinking, like most people do, actually misses what's happening. Rumination isn't random mental noise. It's a specific cognitive process your brain runs when it believes a piece of unfinished business is still open. And it won't stop running until it either gets resolution or gets interrupted by something more urgent. Here's the mechanism underneath it. Your brain has a built-in system for flagging incomplete tasks and unresolved situations, sometimes called the Zeigarnik effect, named after the psychologist who first documented it. Unfinished tasks get held in active memory longer and more vividly than completed ones. A conversation that ended with ambiguity, an interaction where you're not sure how the other person felt, a moment where you said something and never got to see how it landed. All of these register to your brain as unfinished. And unfinished, to your nervous system, means unsafe to fully let go of. This is why it's almost always the ambiguous moments that come back at night, not the clear-cut ones. If someone got visibly angry at you, that's unpleasant, but it's resolved information. You know exactly where you stand. It's the uncertain interactions, the slightly awkward pause, the message that got left unread, the joke that maybe didn't land, that keep replaying because your brain genuinely doesn't have enough data to close the file, and it hates leaving files open. Let's talk about why nighttime specifically is when this hits hardest. During the day, your brain is flooded with external input, tasks, conversations, decisions, sensory information constantly competing for attention. At night, lying still in a quiet room, that external noise disappears, and there's finally enough spare processing capacity for the brain to pull up whatever's still sitting unresolved in the queue. It's not that nighttime creates the rumination, it's that nighttime removes everything that was previously drowning it out. Here's a pattern interrupt worth sitting with for a second. Think about the specific conversation that replays most often for you. Now ask yourself honestly, what information are you actually missing that you're trying to figure out? Most of the time, it's not really about what you said. It's about not knowing how it was received, and your brain is essentially trying to solve for an unknown variable it doesn't have access to, running the same incomplete equation over and over, hoping a different pass will somehow produce the missing number. This connects to something deeper about why certain people ruminate far more than others. Research on rumination consistently links it to a heightened sensitivity to social evaluation, an elevated concern with how one is perceived by others. People who ruminate heavily tend to have grown up in environments where social standing, approval, or belonging felt conditional rather than guaranteed, which trains the brain to treat every ambiguous social moment as potentially significant, worth rechecking, worth reanalyzing, just in case it actually mattered more than it seemed to at the time. There's an evolutionary logic buried in here too, even though it feels miserable in a modern context. For most of human history, social standing within a small group was directly tied to survival. Being disliked or cast out wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. A brain that obsessively tracks and reanalyzes social interactions, even ones that happened years ago, was doing exactly what it evolved to do. Protecting your place in the group by making absolutely sure nothing damaging slipped past unnoticed. The mechanism is ancient. It just hasn't caught up to the fact that forgetting an awkward comment from a coworker in 2019 isn't actually a survival threat anymore. Let's talk about what rumination is not, because this distinction matters. It's not the same as reflection, even though they can look similar from the outside. Reflection moves toward insight or resolution. You think about something, extract a lesson or a decision, and then the thought naturally quiets down. Rumination, by contrast, is a loop that doesn't resolve. You replay the same scene without extracting anything new from it, covering identical ground repeatedly, which is exactly why it feels so exhausting and so pointless even while you're in the middle of doing it. Here's what actually helps interrupt the loop, and it's counterintuitive. Trying to force yourself to stop thinking about it almost never works, because suppression tends to backfire, making the thought more insistent rather than less. What works better is giving the incomplete file some form of closure, even artificial closure. Writing the situation down, specifically what happened and what you were afraid it meant, gives your brain something it was missing in the moment. A completed record instead of an open loop still waiting to be filed away. Another surprisingly effective approach is scheduling the rumination instead of fighting it. Telling yourself, "I'll think about this fully for 10 minutes tomorrow at 3 p.m. sounds almost too simple to work, but it gives the brain's unfinished business detector something it craves, a guarantee that the thought will get addressed, just not right now. That guarantee alone is often enough to quiet the nighttime loop, because the thing driving the repetition isn't the content of the memory, it's the fear that if you don't think about it now, it'll never get resolved at all. It also helps to recognize, in the moment, what's actually happening physiologically. Rumination at night frequently comes with a subtle physical charge, a tightness in the chest, a low hum of alertness, because your nervous system is treating the unresolved social situation as a live concern rather than old information. Naming that sensation out loud, even just internally, "This is my brain trying to close an old file," creates a small amount of distance between you and the loop, and that distance is often enough to let the thought pass through instead of getting stuck. There's also a version of this worth naming that isn't purely social. Some people ruminate on decisions rather than conversations, replaying whether they made the right call on something, a purchase, a career move, a way they handled a disagreement. The mechanism is identical, an unresolved sense of whether the outcome was good or bad, but the content differs. What both versions share is the same underlying discomfort with ambiguity, a mind that would rather keep working on an unclear situation than file it away as simply unknowable, even when unknowable is genuinely the most accurate answer available. It's worth mentioning the relationship between rumination and self-criticism too, because they tend to travel together. People who ruminate heavily about social interactions often default to the least generous interpretation of their own behavior in the replay, assuming they came across worse than they actually did, assigning themselves more blame for an awkward moment than any objective observer would. This happens because rumination isn't a neutral replay of events. It's a replay filtered through whatever your baseline level of self-doubt already is, which means the same ambiguous interaction can generate wildly different levels of nighttime distress, depending entirely on how harshly you already tend to judge yourself. One more thing worth understanding. Rumination tends to worsen with fatigue because the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for redirecting attention and applying perspective, is one of the first systems to lose efficiency when you're tired. That's part of why these loops hit hardest right before sleep, not just because it's quiet, but because it's often the exact moment your brain has the least capacity left to talk itself down from an unresolved thought. Getting enough rest isn't just generally good advice here. It's directly protective against the mechanism itself. If you're someone who replays conversations at night, here's the reframe worth taking with you. This isn't a character flaw, and it isn't proof that something's wrong with the interaction you're replaying. It's a highly attentive, socially sensitive brain doing exactly what it was built to do, just running an outdated program in a context where the stakes are almost never what they feel like at 2 a.m. You don't need to relive it. You just need to give it somewhere to land. Tell me in the comments about the conversation that replays for you the most, even the small ones, especially the small ones. And if you're rereading this description right now, wondering if you worded your comment correctly, That's the exact same loop we just talked about.